Welcome to Open Veil, where I discuss a variety of concepts that expand your perception on reality while allowing you to enter into your infinite potential by simply liberating your mind to its possibilities. Do you dare to wander in the depth of my mind?
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for returning for those that have heard previous podcasts. On today's interesting topic or discussion, I wanted to discuss the journey of life and how crucial it is for us to all get into the awareness of what it is, but not only that, trusting in the process itself, because it has more meaning and purpose than we can currently perceive at this level of our perception. And when thinking about the concept of trusting the process, me, myself, in my own life journey, experiencing many different varieties and facets of my journey and my internal journey overall, I came to the realization of many things that contribute to my development on a soul level, but as well as the expansion of my own awareness of myself. For I believe that the journey in our life is one that allows us the opportunity to explore all facets of ourselves, so that in the doing, we explore and discover our true nature, our not only true nature, but our full and whole nature, so that in the process, we come back into center of our truth while exploring life through the experience of diversity and duality, right? And I always bring the concept of duality because as I experience my own endeavors and my own life experiences and my own challenges and obstacles and my own blisses and my own moments that allow me to fully embrace and be grateful for the exploration of life, it allowed me to perceive life from all different angles, all walks of life, all levels of my own consciousness. As I reflect back on myself in my current state as my past state and on my, soon to be future state. It is an adventure that allowed me to realize the purpose behind the meaning of life as I get to know more of myself. For in the purpose of life is to know the self, because the more we know of the self, the more we allow ourselves to understand, accept, empathize, and have compassion for everyone around us. Because everyone around us is only but a reflection of what we are projecting. And the projection that we are experiencing and perceiving in our reality, in our external reality, is the projection of what's happening within us. And with doing research, being triggered to do more research because of my own experiences, whether that be dream state, inner journeys of my inner psyche, experiences in life that allowed me to question things, that allowed me to spark a curiosity of the unknown, of the why behind things. It allowed me to have enough curiosity to have the desire and ambition to do more research regarding the matter that led me into my realization of what I'm about to discuss in this podcast. And I wanted to also, for those that don't know of Carl Jung, he's one of the pioneers behind the inner psyche of the human behavior and all of its inner natures and outer natures. So Carl Jung was basically known for his psychoanalysis. So basically he studied the inner psyche of the human behavior and what triggers it and what causes and creates certain disorders and mental illnesses. And in that he discovered many concepts through his own personal experiences, but as well as analyzing it within his own patients. So there was a lot that I can relate to with the work that he's done and other people as well. But I bring that into highlights for those that want to do more research. I would highly recommend his work to start with. Now, going back to the concept, the only way that I can better explain the topic so that everyone at all levels of their own consciousness, at all levels of experience, can understand the grander purpose, right? So when I was thinking about it and actually writing about it, the first thought that came was, what storyline, what metaphor, what mythical story can I use? Just like in ancient times, mythical stories were the interpretation of the inner journey. So they use, whether it was biblical scriptures or, the things that were written on stone and things of that nature throughout our culture and, centuries ago, it was to store the history of the internal journey. And I say it's the internal journey because, like I say, I'm not speaking by only research, as there is plenty of research confirming these things, but also my internal journey that I've gone on allowed me to see the perspective on all those angles of possibilities. And how I always say, life happens for you, not to you. The further you go into who you are and discovering your truth and your full nature, you start to understand the reasoning behind why everything happens the way it does. You start to understand and accept why people in your life had to be present and had to be removed. You understand the concept behind all of these scenarios and experiences because now you realize the wisdom that came from it. You realize the strength that came from it. You realize the development in yourself that you were able to manifest through those experiences. So by understanding and being in awareness of why they exist in the first place, we come into the full understanding of them, therefore no longer being triggered or emotionally charged to hold resentment, anger, a hate for anything outside of us because we see the purpose behind it. And with those experiences triggering awareness, expanding my own development of consciousness, I come to the realization that we have the duality of our reality so that we know the contrast of everything. Like I always say in every, I think, podcast I've been doing lately, it's been right back into the same concept. The duality of our nature is a necessary nature that allows us to experience the human nature as spiritual beings. So when you look at it in a way that you are a spiritual being having a temporary experience, you understand that the experience allows you, one, to not only be within yourself as a spiritual being, but you're being within yourself inside an environment that allows you the opportunity to explore multiple facets of yourself through the exploration of nature, right? And us being a part of nature, being made of material and elements, right? All of these things coming together, creating the dynamic of creation that if one to look at the physical aspect as a creation of art, a creation of a masterpiece, it is only as it can be perceived as you, as the creator, exploring yourself within your own creation. So it's almost like painting a picture and loving it so much and being mesmerized and embracing it so dearly that in your spark of imagination of what it would be to be within that, you created the imaginational thought that triggered that, therefore manifesting yourself within it. So I'm putting this as a concept of our creator, God, universe, whatever you prefer to put it as, creating or with its creation of wanting to paint a picture or create a sculpture that resembled Earth. And in Earth, there's multiple things. There's a variety of organisms, flowers, trees, oceans, air, all of these things that in the intelligence that it is, continues a creation within itself. So when you look at Earth, Earth is a conscious organism that has consciousness within it, but is only at the lowest density of its consciousness, meaning it has a momentum of creation. It has the intelligence to continue the cycle of life, meaning it has a birth, a cycle of its existence, and a death process. And it's a continuous cycle of birth and death and rebirth, right? And that intelligence does not have to think or perceive itself to be what it is. It just simply is within the mechanism of that intelligence. And I will put it an example of our human body. The human body, when we are born, produces its cells that create tissues. The tissues know what tissues go where. As we start to develop from fetus to a newborn child, our organism is fully developed, creating organs that function properly on its own. Therefore, we know how to, we can blink, we can eat, we can consume, we can swallow, we can digest our food, we can release our food, and there continues the cycle all over again. From dust we come and from dust we go back to, right? So this is an intelligence that is an automatic function of our human nature. And that function is driven by the mechanism to survive, the mechanism to strive, the mechanism to reproduce itself, so that in the creation, it continues on creating more of itself, so that it maintains within the practice of creation itself. And that alone is a different level of consciousness, because once you know what you need to do in the process of your mechanism, there's not much thinking that has to be taking place. It's only about going within that instinct, like the animalistic instinct within every living thing, to know what it's supposed to do to survive. Now, just like the body has its natural instinct, Earth has a natural instinct. Everything that is a living organism has that intelligence within itself to have the survival mechanism to survive within itself, to breed within itself. Just like when we get cut, we don't tell our cut to heal. It knows to heal itself. It knows to survive. And the more harsh the environment becomes, the more endurance and fortitude the organism knows to become, because it knows how to readjust itself to its own environment. No matter where, whether it's too hot temperature or too cold, there are bacteria that can exist through any change of temperature, no matter what. It is still a continuous living being within that, even surpassing all organisms, because there's always a degree of how much drive, how much fortitude, how much endurance the mechanism of this intelligence has. There's different degrees to its mechanism. It does not have to be conscious of what it is. It just is. So when we look at our inner nature and the things that within us that contradict our inner knowing, right? So when we look at outside of ourselves, well, let's look at it this way. When we look at the spirit coming within the body, it is the duality of both our natures. It is the duality of our human nature that comes from the organisms that have the natural mechanism to survive, to strive, to reproduce. That is an instinct. That is an automatic process. That is an unconscious thing that we have been engraved within our DNA, in our body to do, is our human nature. What makes us conscious as we evolve as human beings, we develop on a brain scale, we develop our frontal cortex, which is conscious and observant of its nature by perceiving and being aware by observing its thoughts, its habits, its emotions. It is experiencing the human nature by the observation of the human nature. So by becoming one with the human nature, by coming the spirit within the human nature, it is now the power invested in us. It is now the spirit that the Father, the God, whatever you want to call it, gives us to go and integrate with the duality of both our natures, the duality of existing within the automatic instinct of human nature, as well as the spiritual nature of being observant of what that behavior is and what drives one to be. Because that is a drive, that is a why, that is a purpose. So when you have the duality of both things, you're existing with the duality of your awareness when becoming conscious of it. So when people act on impulses and people do things that are considered evil, they are only living on the mechanism that allows them to strive and survive. So this, on a perspective from a higher degree, would only be perceived as an unconscious being acting on its human nature until becoming conscious to self-reflect and be self-aware of its own behavior. Just like a child when born. A child does not know why it cries. It just knows that when it cries, it gets fed and diaper changes and the mother nurtures its needs because that's how it survives. It's not conscious of why it cries. If you ask even a child at the age of 4 or 5 when it could already speak and you state something to them or you speak to them a certain way and it makes them feel a certain way, like someone says something mean to them. A little boy says something mean to a little girl and she starts crying. You see the little girl crying because you didn't see what happened and you go to the little girl. She either tells you what happened and why she's crying. Therefore, she's self-reflecting on her emotions and why it caused her to cry because the little boy hurt her feelings. Or she would simply say, I don't know. That's being unconscious of the behavior. So just like that, unfortunately, maturity is not something that comes with age. Maturity is something that comes with experience and us allowing ourselves to reevaluate the experience and be in tune to what's happening by being tuned in and tapped into that emotional state so that we can reflect on it by observing it rather than reacting to it. Reaction comes from the ego. Ego comes from surviving. Responding comes from observing, right? Therefore, we're aware. It's a drive from awareness. So being conscious and being unconscious is really the grand duality of our existence. When people act on impulses and on behaviors that might hurt the other person, they are acting on a lack of awareness of how that affects the other person. They are acting and reacting to life on from a hurt place. So only hurt people because they don't even know why they're hurt in the first place. So they're projecting their fears or insecurities or pain or trauma out into the external reality to other people because they have not yet been able to process their own traumas, their own emotions, their own pains, their own suffering. So they react just like, for example, a child that cries when it feels discomfort or a child that cries when it feels uncomfortable or hungry. It is only a reaction. So when you do the work of self-evaluating and self-reflecting on your behaviors and why you're acting that way and why you're thinking that way and why do you believe that, is you're really in tune with who you truly are, you start taking back the power you give it on the automatic state. So when we start believing that, we're stuck in the matrix and it's trying to control us and all of these things, we've been born into the matrix. The matrix is only our human nature, our animalistic nature. And the biblical scriptures and all of these spiritual scriptures that guide us through the process of life is really the guidance of our internal journey in the knowing of the self. The knowing of the self allows us to explore all facets of ourselves and our dual nature, but being able to come to center, being able to not go all the way to the light because you will be blinded by the light. You will have the perception that you know better, so you want to control things and put things into order because in your theory, in your philosophy, in your perception of seeing too high above everyone else, too high in the light, you're blinded. Your belief that you're superior or being in the nature or behavior of arrogance doesn't allow you to have compassion and understanding for those who don't see the light yet. And how are you serving anyone else in that level? You're only self-serving yourself. That is a selfish state of being as well. So this is why the chaos in our reality still exists, because those that do find light, they find too much light, and now they look down upon people that haven't found it yet. And that's not serving anyone. Why? Because it's creating imbalance within everyone. We are all connected. We are all one. So how can we balance that scale? By thinking we're better than someone else. And now an unconscious person, for example, on that perspective, that hasn't seen the light to understand its own nature, to understand why things had to happen, creates the illusion of suffering, of fear, and all these things. Because of not understanding, we fear the unknown. And when you fear the unknown, you're living in the suffering of your own nature, of your nature to want to survive and strive. So when you don't understand something, your impulses create the illusion that you have to fight, create the illusion that you have to scream to feel heard, create the illusion that the people that are above you are trying to get at you. When in reality, it's just a projection of what's happening within us. It's really us against ourselves. Because when you start discovering the light, you start thinking that your human nature is evil. You start putting your human nature as the beast within you, as a devil. But in reality, when you really reflect on your human nature and your spiritual nature, combining the two is the only balance that allows you to see both sides of that spectrum and be in the harmony and peace of yourself. Because anything out of balance creates what? Dis-ease. It's not ease and harmonious because it's not in its own ebb and flow of itself. So that's why when we go through life and we go through the experiences of life that allow us the perception of all angles of the spectrum, allows us to see ourselves in everyone and everything, because we've experienced enough of it to understand everyone for their nature, understand everyone for why they do things, because I too have been there. I too can understand that point of view, but I also understand this point of view. Then you become unbiased. And when you become unbiased, you become more powerful than being biased. Why? Because with those two forces and awareness of yourself, you become the power source within yourself. You become tapped in and one within the power invested within you, which is the center that allows you to truly know who you are and allow yourself to love yourself, understand yourself, and accept yourself and others. Because now you understand how everyone is going through the same experience, just at different levels of the spectrum. And what you look as evil is only lack of awareness of self and lack of awareness of understanding that everyone is a projection of who we are. And what's in this harmony within us is going to project in our external reality. So we are only learning from each other as we are only mirroring back to each other the things that we have to filter, the things that we have to evaluate, reflect on, and recalibrate within ourselves. Because something that we see that irritates and triggers us in another is something that exists within us. If not, we wouldn't be able to even see it. But if we keep denying our nature, we keep denying the fact that we are both sides of that spectrum, and then instead of accepting it, we judge it, criticize it, shame it, and feel guilt about it, then what happens? You create your own suffering, because now you're creating the chaos within yourself to create the hell that you're living in. And when you're creating your own suffering, is by choice, because you have the free will to choose to become aware but balance, or remain unaware and off balance. So basically saying that we are from this world on a human nature. Our body is from this human world, but our spirit is not. And what we have to overcome is the imbalance of itself. The mission for us as human beings and as spiritual beings is being able to integrate both sides of ourselves so that we can create that harmony. And life is going to give you all the challenges to look at you so that you can know the self on all sides of the coin. There's always two sides to the coin. And if it doesn't have two sides, guess what? That coin doesn't have value. If a coin that you use to purchase something is missing one side of that coin, guess what happens? It's no longer in value. It's not a valuable coin. You can't even use it to purchase or create. So in order for us to be creators of our own reality, of our own world, we have to create the balance within ourselves, the balance to accept and understand why we are the way we are. And what makes us, there's no such thing as good and evil. It's just the balance of our duality. It's just unconscious and conscious, and it being all on different levels of the spectrums, because there's also different levels as to where you stand on that level of consciousness. And when you get knowledge, it's not to think that you know more or you're better than anyone. It's to use that as you've been gifted the ability through experience to gain that wisdom, to then share it, to then find that harmony within yourself so that you can expand that outwardly. So that in the combination of your truth, you use your consciousness of wisdom and your drive of your human nature to actually make a difference in the world. What's your why? What's your reasoning? Find your why and find your reason of why you survive or why you do things, and make that the drive of why it is so crucial for you to be in balance with yourself. And why that will make the difference, because the better you become, the more you heal, the better the world around you becomes, and the more the world around you heals, because we're projecting what's happening within us. So if there's anywhere to start, it's always within the self. The faster you get into the realization that nothing is against you, it's only you against yourself. Anytime you're criticizing yourself, anytime you're neglecting your own needs, anytime you're not standing up for yourself, because that is a survival mechanism of our human nature. Our human nature knows how to survive, how to strive, how to reproduce, how to do anything it needs to do to survive and keep going. We need to tap into that, but also tapping into that with the awareness of what that is and what that process feels like and what that process looks like and what it is to be within that, and love every process and every inch of your being. Because it is the experience that allows us the present of existing within this nature. And that's a beautiful thing if you start looking for the beauty within it rather than its distortion and its imbalances, because that's what we have to overcome here. The process of knowing the self is knowing both sides of ourselves without judgment, without criticism or shame. And the faster we get there, the faster we have that expanded outwardly. The faster we don't have to create chaos. We don't feel hate for another. We don't judge another. Why? Because we know that in the doing of that, we are only doing it to ourselves. This is why the people that judge the most, the people that criticize the most, are the people that do it to themselves, because they have an internal narrative, a doctrine, a belief system that tells them that they are wrong for being human. They are wrong for knowing to survive. They are wrong for having the impulses of human nature. So what is that doing? Creating the disease within your own suffering. And that's not how we're going to change. And that's not how the world is going to change. Picking sides is not going to do it. It's about bringing both sides together. That's going to do it. And the more we realize this and we come into this awareness, the more liberating life becomes, the more beautiful life becomes. Now the journey is no longer a challenge. Now the journey is a process that allows us to embrace the process, to enjoy the process and play with it and have fun with it and truly be in the true bliss, not in the illusionary bliss of ignorance, but in the true bliss of knowing ourselves, and in the knowing still being able to love ourselves. And there's nothing more rewarding than that. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening.